Welcome to the Occult Rejects. In this episode, we're back with Mario for some lunar symbolism. If you happen to miss the solar symbolism, I highly suggest to go back and check that out. And today I got the usual co-host, Lisa, the Occult Reject Mad Scientist. We got Contemporary Problems, TJ, back with us to run some numbers. And we got the Headless Giant and my man Jin the Ninja. We're basically the same crew plus one this week. And you know what? I'll go around the room just in case there's new people. And bells are going. The cookies are ready. Someone's donuts are done. I'll go around the room and we'll start with Mario first since his alarm's going off. Mario, let everybody know who you are and where they can find your amazing work, please.
It wasn't my alarm, but I was just double checking. Happy to be here. People can find me at symbolicstudies.com. And I'm stoked to talk to you guys again. I got a lot out of the last conversation, and I don't know. There's brilliant people here, so it makes it more exciting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Lisa.
Twitter, Solis Lisa, or Instagram, Lisa Solis, and then the occultresearchinstitute.org.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. And I think everybody here actually has stuff on there, except for maybe Headless. Maybe he does. But I think everybody here does actually have something up on there.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, so check that out for sure. Oh, and you know what I need to plug? I haven't plugged it all. And since we're live, maybe some people will catch it. Unfortunately, I'll probably be out of them by the time the show drops. But I do have a bunch of stickers that I'm sending out for the Occult Rejects. We got this one. That was created by my tattoo artist. And the same thing right here. And then I do have one by Darby O'Trill. He made that one. It's kind of like, called. It's kind of the optic nerve crossing and stuff. So, if you want any of those, hit me up on Twitter, Instagram, or email us, and we will send out some free stickers. They're not for sale because if you're tagging them up, you're actually advertising for me, so I'm not going to charge you. All right. So, I wanted to get that out of the way. And Contemporary Problems. TJ, plug yourself, please.
What's up? I run Contemporary Problems stuff. I'm excited to talk about this. I describe myself as a walking, talking full moon. So if you're talking about the moon, I'll probably show up. So pretty hyped.
Awesome. Thank you very much for joining us again, man. I appreciate it. And my man, Headless Giant, let everybody know where they can find your amazing work.
You can find me on X and YouTube. I'm going to try and restrain myself from making a bunch of butt jokes tonight.
Okay. All right. Oh, God. Okay, I got it. Wow, that's fun. You're good. And my favorite ninja, Jen. Let everybody know if they can find you.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, TJ. Thanks, HG. And then, obviously, Mario. Awesome to do this again. I think the moon is of interest to all of us. People can find me, Threshold Saints, Spotify and Apple, and on Twitter or X, Wukong Reborn, WUKONG Reborn. And I just dropped a Hoffman episode, so check it out.
Go check it out. Awesome. Thank you very much, sir. I don't know if we're going to be going. I'm not going to say anything because I'm not sure if we're going live. All right, yeah. So that was everybody. I guess if we'll just Mario. Would you like to start it off?
Yeah, for sure. So, one of the things I wish I would have done last time is talk more about kind of the exoteric symbolism of the sun, what the sun is commonly known for. So I think talking about the moon in that way and like what are the common associations with the moon that most people might be aware of or even intuitively kind of be aware of. So the moon generally corresponds with water. So like everything having to do with water and cycles. The moon is associated with the chariot card, right? So I think of like the movement of the chariot wheels and everything else. It's not uncommon for the charioteer to even have like crescent moons on his shoulders, right? The moon is a really powerful planet, body that has been used as a sky clock for a lot of cultures, right? So even like, Islam and Judaism, those are kind of my go-to sort of examples, having holy days that revolve around the moon. And so it's based on the lunar calendar, the lunar cycle of things. And so the whole idea of the moon being an instrument for measurement is pretty fascinating too. It's my understanding that a lot of words that begin with M vowel N are actually related to the moon. So minute, as an example, goes back to the moon. Month goes back to the moon. It's moonth, right? Monday is associated with the moon. Menstruation, also to MEN, right? Goes back to the moon. I would say even man himself goes back to the moon. It's kind of like symbolically, we are like lunar children in a way, right? We're always constantly evolving and changing and things like that. The moon itself, when you look at it, obviously there's those craters on the moon, which are kind of like a whole mysterious thing in and of themselves too. There's a conversation about why some of them aren't deeper and why some of them are like the crater impact is almost like a perpendicular strike. It almost looks like the craters should be skidding at some points and whatever. There's all sorts of crazy stuff about the moon that I find to be fascinating, and I'm not sure if I have all the answers on what the moon exactly is. There's a lot of, speculation about the moon. I even brought it up right before we went live, but I have this book here called Who Built the Moon? And I haven't read it from cover to cover, but I have kind of like skimmed through it over the years. And they talk about all of the anomalies with the moon. And there's a ton of them, especially when you look through the lens of like what we've been told about the moon. It's very, very odd. The idea that we only see one side of the moon perpetually, right? What's up with the dark side of the moon? The fact that the moon is supposedly the right distance away to create, these eclipses and eclipse the sun just perfectly. Like the math for that to work out, the size of the moon, the distance of the moon, the supposed size of the sun, the distance of the sun, for them to have like an exact match for an eclipse is pretty wild to kind of consider and think about. But yeah, the craters of the moon too, relate to like chalice symbolism, in my opinion, grail symbolism. They're vessels, right? So symbolically, this relates also to the idea that the moon itself carries a lot of vessel and watery symbolism, because the crescent moon in and of itself looks like a container. The glyph for water, by the way, right, is like a downward triangle. So there's like a yoni sort of aspect with that. It kind of looks like it's meant to hold something. The two feminine elements, water and earth, are downward triangles. Earth being a downward triangle, with a line through it. So there's definitely this receptivity that corresponds with the moon as well. And there's a receptivity that corresponds with divine feminine symbolism, right? So even once again, just think of the womb, think of the yoni being more receptive in nature versus, the phallus being more projective in nature, right? And so there's a lot of yin energy with the moon. But there's a lot of cultures too that have a different opinion about the moon. So I used to think it was almost universal that the moon was feminine and more yin. But like the Germans, if I'm understanding things correctly, like they see the moon as actually being masculine. But what I found with symbolism generally is that eventually, once you learn enough, you're going to find the yin in the yang and the yang in the yin. And that seems to be like, something that I've really accepted and makes so much sense, right? There's not one symbol or deity that's completely just feminine or masculine. There's probably a gray area and things kind of encoded into their symbolism that actually, kind of has an opposing sort of element or a complementary element to it. Also, the moon, because of the crescent shape and the craters and all of this stuff, has been associated with like arc symbolism as well, I would say. Almost like a boat, something that kind of carries you and travels, so there is kind of like this ship quality to it, right? Kind of like a vehicle of some sort. And I think this is really interesting too, because once again, it corresponds with Cancer and the Chariot card. So you have that vehicle right there, right, with the chariot itself, and then the cyclical motion of the wheel itself, the chariot wheel. But the moon has long been viewed as kind of like the first stepping stone to get to other places. And so in that way, it's almost like the first gate out of here, like on an astral level. And then it's also the last gate back. That's something that has been associated with the moon like time and time and time again. And so even on the moon card, what you see are twin towers, right? And when you see twin towers, two pillars, you're basically creating a doorway or a portal or a gateway or something along these lines. And so it's kind of been said too that the moon is like the collector of souls. There's different quotes that I've read throughout the years of people speculating that the moon harvests souls, consumes them or absorbs them, you know, in some way, shape, or form, which is really interesting because a lot of the older moon cards, you'll see droplets leaving Earth going towards the moon, basically. This fits in with that receptivity sort of business, right, that I'm talking about. This also fits in with the moon being sort of the first gateway out of here. There's this idea that, you know, you can astral project. There's these different ascension techniques, and that you start with the moon to get to other planes of existence, other planes of existence that may correspond with the 7 traditional planets. There's also a system that corresponds these 7 gates with the 7 stars of Ursa Major. Some people argue that this was actually one of the first, like, original systems, basically. And there's rituals called like star stepping rituals. And I actually have a slide that kind of shows you what I'm talking about. And maybe you can just show that. So it's the 4th slide of what I sent you. And this is a Chinese star stepping ritual called the Pace of You. And if I'm not mistaken, you actually means fish, which goes back to, you know, watery symbolism and things like that. This was actually scanned from the book called The Gates of the Necronomicon by Simon. It's a really interesting book, and there's a ton of Ursa Major symbolism in there. But what you can see here is that this ancient Chinese ritual basically has you go from star to star in this ascension ritual. But you'll see that the first star that you go to at the very bottom, they call it the clarity of Yang, is associated with the moon. So that's one sort of way of describing the moon as being the first step out of here. And then you go to Mercury, and then you go to Venus, the sun, etc. And then the last gate, you know, is Saturn. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that this is sort of like an older, you know, concentric ringed, you know, way of looking at like the universe. This isn't like an uncommon thing you'll see like in alchemical texts and stuff, but you'll see that the moon, the layer associated with Luna, is closer in. So the idea is that if you're ascending out of Earth or you're astral projecting, you are going to have to cross the phase that is associated with the moon, or cross sort of the dimension or whatever you want to say that corresponds with the moon. This is pretty interesting too, because I don't have a zodiac here, a zodiac wheel. But I've done videos on this before, and it's this old idea that the gateway of man, what's been referred to as the gateway of man, is associated with Cancer, and that we come via Cancer, we come through Cancer, and then we exit through Capricorn, which is associated with Saturn. So once again, we have this sort of similar dynamic of the moon kind of being first, if you will, and then Saturn kind of being the end of the line, or something like that. It's kind of interesting that this is played out too in 2001: A Space Odyssey. I think that they're playing around with this similar sort of dynamic, because the first stop is the moon, and then in the book they're supposed to go to Saturn, but if I'm not mistaken, they changed it for the film. It's actually Jupiter. So you're not actually going through all of the 7 gates or all of the 7 realms. They're kind of stunting you before you get to the end. Supposedly they did this because Saturn would have been too difficult to you know, display and be created in a cinematic sort of way. So they chose to go with Jupiter instead of Saturn. But I bring up the gateway of man and the gateway of the gods. That's the term for Capricorn, because really what this is about, this actually has a lot to do with the solstices, right? And so the summer solstice is actually when the sun starts descending, right? So that's the height of how much in the northern hemisphere we're going to have the most sun at that time. And then it's going to start waning until the winter solstice. So symbolically, what I've read is that actually this is a symbolic pole, basically, and that cultures that were more polar in nature acknowledge the solstices as like the annual cycle, the beginning of the year, right? So that would be like right around New Year's Day, right? New Year's Eve, the winter solstice, which is a little bit earlier, but I think Christmas is encoding a lot of this symbolism. And so the beginning of the year would be in Capricorn season, right around there. This is associated actually with the North Pole, which is interesting because Santa is from the North Pole, right? And so there's a lot of northern polar symbolism baked into Saturn symbolism from what I've gathered. And then what I've heard is that actually solar cults actually more so acknowledge the equinoxes as being the pole of the year, basically. And so in astrology, which is a solar-based system, because we're paying attention to the path of the sun, the first sign in astrology is Aries, which is the spring equinox. And so I've heard that this is a shift that has happened over the years, and that there's actually something to be said about different cultures and when they acknowledge the beginning of the year. Is it at an equinox? That's probably more solar, or is it maybe at the winter solstice? That's a little bit more polar. But even in this idea of the gateway of man coming through Cancer, being associated with the moon, kind of fits with some of what I'm saying here. And also, we all come through mother, right? We all come through mom. And so the lunar symbolism associated with childbirth and all of that, you know, is through the roof. There's like a million different things to sort of talk about with that. Even a woman, when she gets pregnant, right? Her breasts are going to get bigger and her belly's going to get bigger. And so she even looks more sort of moon-like. There's more of a lunar sort of quality, you know, to her. Like, absolutely. And then she is also acting as a vessel, you know, in and of herself as well. So there's all of that stuff that's kind of baked into it as well. And then I've got some moon cards. I've got a bunch of other notes, but those are some of the things just like right off the top of my head that the moon is associated with, if anyone else wants to chime in.
Yeah, if I could jump in there real quick. So, go ahead.
No, I was delayed. I was just going to say the etymology, and when you look up with the word cancer, like, because it's used as a diagnosis as well, but the etymology of the word cancer means growth or expansion. So for that to also be the mother and that side, like the two sides of that word.
Beautiful. Nice.
I was going to hop in there. So the Orphic hymn to Selene, or the moon, really kind of encapsulates all of these different kinds of thoughts in the Orphic tradition. And so it's really funny to me to see these Orphics sort of shaping our perception of the moon all the way back then. So it's not too long. I was wondering if I could just read through it real quick. Here, goddess queen, diffusing silver light, bullhorned. Again, they talk about the bullhorn in that vessel shape, and wandering through the gloom of night, with stars surrounded, with the circuit wide, night's torch extending through the heavens you ride, female and male. Again, there's that feminine and masculine aspect to the moon itself that they were talking about thousands of years ago. With silvery rays you shine, now full orbed, now tending to decline, mother of ages, fruit producing mene, M-E-N-E, again, that same context there, whose amber orb makes night's reflected noon. So they were seeing this as a reflected light of the sun as well, which is interesting too. Lover of horses. That's interesting to me because the horse is always assumed to be moon related in a lot of different cultures. And so having that sort of moon and horse symbolism kind of almost goes back to the idea of mind control, because that horse has to be broken, has to be brought under control to get into that realm, going back to the idea of this being the place where the souls are condensed, right? Let me see. Splendid queen of night, all-seeing power, bedecked with starry light, lover of vigilance, the foe of strife, in peace rejoicing and a prudent light, fair lamp of night, its ornament and friend, who givest to nature's works their destined end. Queen of the stars, all wise, goddess hail, decked with graceful robe and amble veil. Come, blessed goddess, prudent, starry bright. Come, moony lamp, with chaste and splendid light. Shine on these sacred rites with prosperous rays, and pleased accept thy suppliant's mystic praise. So all of these Orphic hymns would be used as like a invocation or the beginning point as they would go on with their rituals. And so you see a lot of that symbolism just right there, and the Greeks sort of shaping or using this sort of poem to kind of, influence many, many generations after them.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, same here. No, that was great. Yeah, silver, huge correspondence
Yes.
with the moon, for sure. So that's an important one. And that kind of reminds me of this idea of reflection too. There's a reflective quality that's associated with the moon. There's even people who say that the moon is actually just a reflection of Earth. And that's kind of what we're looking at, and so that there is this mirror-like quality that's associated with it, and there's all sorts of wild videos about it. I think it's interesting and fun. It's not something that I'm like completely invested in or what have you, but some people have tried to make that case that it's actually like literally like a reflection of this realm that we live within, and some people feel like they've spotted exactly where Earth is hanging out at. It looks like our continents and everything else when you zoom into different parts of the moon and stuff. But water being the first way man was able to see self, it corresponds with that as well. Looking into the water and being able to actually see, your own reflection and things like that.
Sorry guys. I just want to jump in and say,
Please.
Mark, that was really great. And to add to your point about the moon having masculine and feminine nature, we have been in my book club. We've been reading this Inner Teachings of Taoism, which is translated by Thomas Cleary, and he talks about how all essence, like all objects that are classified as true yang or true yin, have also the essence of true yin or true yang, depending on how they're classified. So everything, it's exactly like what you said. It like both have the essential essence of both things at the same time, but it's recognizing sort of the outer density of the object. That is how we classify the nature, but really the nature is really both. And so I think that the Vedic astrology really provides a good example of this, because the deity of the moon, the physical moon, Chandra, is a masculine deity. But then once you sort of understand how the grahas work, the grahas pray to a specific they pray to a higher deity. So the grahas pray to Bhairava, Chandra Bhairava specifically, which is a nighttime form of Shiva who wears the crescent moon on his head. Chandra Bhairava prays to his wife, who's Bhairavi. That's the link I sent, Nick. You don't have to bring it up, but I just thought it was interesting. In it's almost like a complete contrast to the sort of deity that Headless presented, because she is nude and she is on the moon and she is experiencing sort of the pleasures and the bliss and the sensuality of the carnal ground for the very first time. And so she is associated with the moon, and specifically the logna. So the sort of the hour at birth in a specific degree to the moon. So that, I think that's also very interesting.
To jump in there are so many different philological translations of just this hymn alone, because the words that they chose to make it really apply across the board. So when they talk about the full orbed, some translations talk about like pregnant, right? So she's related to obstetrics and all the rest of this stuff. So especially with Greek, the philological translations just really go the whole gambit with this one single thing. So many different meanings from the same words,
Absolutely. And even that idea that you brought up, Headless, of the pregnancy. So in Tantra, Bhairavi is not considered pregnant or Lambodharaya, but she holds the skull cup, the Kapala, which is filled with menstrual blood. So I think that that is also another very interesting allusion to what Mario's talking about with the waters, because those are the internal waters of a woman. So yeah, very interesting also.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Even Crowley, since you're still sharing the screen and my slides are there, if you actually, I don't think I have it here, but the Chariot card in the Crowley deck, he's actually holding a spinning wheel or chalice of amethyst, and there's a drop of blood in there. So, like, Holy Grail sort of mysteries as it relates to blood symbolism and things like that, completely in play here with lunar stuff, like through and through, for a few different reasons. But one of the things I was going to say too, it's light, right? This idea of reflected light. There are people that claim and suggest that the moon actually has its own original light, and that there is something to be said about the idea perhaps that it's not reflected at all, and that this idea of it being truly reflected is somehow a misunderstanding or misrepresentation of what's really going on. And a lot of people who kind of go down this rabbit hole also say that the quality of moonlight is very different from sunlight. So either it's transmuted or it's a different type of light. And what I would recommend to people is that next time there's a full moon, go outside, step out in the moonlight, really feel the moonlight, and really get a true sense of how cool it is. And then walk behind a building, walk behind a tree, basically get into a shadow, and you'll notice that it's actually warmer behind the shadow because the moon actually casts and projects a cool light. It's actually, some people have said it's more like a blue light, which is perhaps, some people say, maybe artificial. Maybe there's something sort of going on here that's pretty, mind-blowing and mind-bending. But there is a sort of curious thing going on here with the light. Is it projecting cool blue light in contrast to the warm light of the sun? Definitely do that experiment next time you have the opportunity.
Well, in alchemy, there's this the concept of the moon is always associated with sort of condensation. And as you can see with dew, it's always sort of condensing and creating, that fog layer. When it's at night and in the early morning hours, you start to see it. And that condensation aspect is a result of the cooling of the moon on the surface of the planet. And so when you combine those, you get a very mysterious fluid. I myself, I've done experiments with some of the dew condensate, and you really do get effects from this dew that you collect at night. And so there is that aspect as well. And something a lot of people don't pay attention to is that there was a Greek god of astrology called Astrius, and he's supposed to be the father of the four winds. And having him be associated with the four winds, as well as, being basically the originator of the dew, these two things combine, and you've got, the astrological aspects influencing your life through these nighttime hours.
Dude, that is awesome. So cool, because there is a version of Thoth in ancient Egypt that was Thoth of the four winds, right? And there is an interesting illustration that I have in one of my books, and it's like 4 images of Thoth, and they're all holding on to a single pole, which I think is really interesting. But it's Thoth of the four winds. And there's a huge correspondence with Mercury, alchemy, and the moon itself. And so Thoth was a moon god as well. And when you look at the glyph for Mercury, he has the crescent horns, right? And so it's the crescent horns on top of a circle, on top of a cross. So that's something that I think kind of gets overlooked a little bit. But the Thoth, mercurial, hermetic association with lunar symbolism is very strong. My personal opinion is that there is a lunar correspondence with Mercury, which you could go on and on about as well. Even as it relates to like money, the transfer of money and the alchemical properties of money and currency and stuff has a lot of watery symbolism associated with it. Currency, you put money in a bank, like the bank of a river. You want a flow of money, things like that. Even like mercantile, Mercury, Mercury also being quicksilver, right? And so the silver sort of dynamic going on there is definitely in play. And so I think that there's a lunar sort of weave with Mercury. There's a solar weave with Mercury as well, which is very prominent, and you can totally dive into that. And then there's also a polar weave with Mercury as well. The thrice great Hermes Trismegistus. I think that you can arguably say that there is a lunar, solar, and polar aspect to him, but the lunar thing definitely, just needs to be brought up and mentioned here for some of the reasons that you mentioned.
Well, I'll just jump in and add this, Mario, is that I agree with you that there is a tripartite dialectical sort of interrelationship between Mercury and, as you stated, multiple other sort of stars and planets. And so I think it's interesting to sort of revisit that Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh formula and look at like the deity, I think, or the archetype or the personage anyways, the person who arises at the planet, I think it differs depending on the interaction between Mercury and that planet. So in the case of the moon, I think that electric blue dragon, that's how the Chinese describe Mercury, as an electric blue dragon. So that interacts with the moon, and as you said, quicksilver and silver, and a daughter arises. That's kind of the idea in Chinese, is this hidden daughter. And also in Tantra, that is also how it's often described. So I think that there's something really fascinating there. But Mercury with the sun, that's more of a prince, right? So I think there's something, you're totally onto something. And I'm thinking of it, but I'm not maybe quite clear in how to articulate it.
If I could interject a little bit of anatomy and physiology just for a little bit. I know it's like completely different from occultism, but well, that you can take up where I could leave off then. So the pineal gland itself, and I believe the submandibular gland, has been shown to change morphologically with the moon. In essence, during a full moon, you see more of a swelling of the pinealocytes, and they believe that it has to do with displacement of electrons from a concentric form or wherever you are. And so the change that happens to the pineal gland, as well as to some glands within the submandibular, happens during a full moon. So if you're exposed to a full moon, you will have changes to your pineal. There is, I believe, Nick, you had mentioned that was it Resh or something that you go, Libra Resh, that
it's a prayer, sorry.
that you're supposed to face north. That would make sense in a full moon because you're charging your pineal at night. There's that. So leaving the pineal and talking more about the female. So with the female, the female primate, human, Homo sapien. So in the menstrual cycle of the female herself, it is 28 days essentially, right? Give or take. And the way that it is divided, it starts with a follicular phase, and then it grows up follicles within the ovary itself. And that roughly takes about 14 days. When the ovum is chosen, and it's pretty much chosen by the body and the genetics and all that other stuff, to be released and sent out, be ready for ovulation, it will burst out, and then you'll have like ovulation, which usually lasts anywhere between 15 to maybe 30 hours. So you have like a window, like a 24-hour period. And during that phase, you have a growth of a yellow body. So you have almost like a lunar looking object, or like pimple really on the ovary itself. And that yellow body, which they call the corpus luteum, basically controls the uterus and telling the uterus to, be quiet, we're waiting for sperm, don't do anything. But what's interesting is that the corpus, the luteal phase with the follicular phase and then now the luteal phase, it's also 14 days. And then you have, if nothing happens, then you have menstruation. But when you look at the lunar phases, the movement from full moon to new moon is about 13 days and 22 hours, I believe. So it almost maps the follicular phase. And then you have ovulation, which is either your full moon or your new moon, which lasts, I believe, 24 hours as well, right? It doesn't last that long. And then you move into the next phase to move you to the next, either full moon or new moon, however you're counting it, which is also 13 days. So not only does it map the 28-day cycle, but it actually maps the follicular phase as well as the lunar phase, the waxing and the waning. The other thing that I wanted to say.
If I can pop in just real quick, you said
Mhm.
the submandible is
Submandibular.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like the werewolf, right? Because the werewolf has the submandible that's extending out and becoming this sort of dog-like thing, and that's associated with
And
the
you
full
have the
moon.
changing in the actual teeth. Absolutely. And then Jen can correct me if I'm wrong. It is during the nighttime when plants grow.
Some
You
do, yeah.
have,
There's some bloom too during the night.
yeah, but usually in plant like anatomy and physiology, the metabolism is happening. The photosynthesis and all that stuff is happening during the day. Because they're absorbing the sun and all of its energy. But when you actually have lengthening of the actual plant itself, will happen at night. It requires no sun or basically nighttime to extend or grow. And you can do this quick experiment. If you stick plants in a dark cabinet, all of a sudden they come like out long and lanky or whatever, because they've been exposed to no sun. So they have all these kind of like longness to them. I think that's right. Right, Jen? I don't.
No, that's completely right, and I think you could even think of it in an alchemical way of like the silverine light is affecting what we would say is like the copper of the green, the chlorophyllic copper, like that makes it a pure green. I think that there is something, like I said, like Mario said, like the interaction between like the different lights, you're getting different effects.
Yes.
With the product, like in synthesis.
Yes, absolutely. And then my last point is that what I've noticed in the quick study that I've done is the worship of the moon, it being maternal, is usually found most often around the cultures of the equator. But then when you move to the extremities, to the poles, that's when you start to see the shift from female to male in terms of lunar. That's kind of, and I don't know if that has more to do with agriculture, the animals or anything like that. And I will say I grew up on a ranch. I've taken care of animals in my academic career, whatever, and it never fails. You have a full moon, and all of them go into parturition. They start giving birth. So it's not just something that is a folk tale. It happens, and you're just like, darn it, I have a test tomorrow. You know what I mean? And so so yeah, it happens. So something changes for sure.
Very, very
I
interesting.
add that in horticulture or whatever, the general rule is that you want to plant your seeds a few days before the full moon, and again, the moon is like pulls the tides, and then you're also expecting that seed to pop out of the ground come the following new moon after that.
Oh, I did not know that. That's interesting.
I know there's people who cut their hair based around the moon, right? I mean, you can do all sorts of different things, based on the lunar calendar. But yeah, the sort of transformative transmutation quality is so high with the moon. It's kind of crazy and nuts. And to me, it relates, or at least there's a correspondence there with the cycles, again of the wheel, right? The wheel of heaven or the chariot wheel. Even the glyph for Cancer, right, almost looks like it's supposed to be spinning, which that's the only sign associated with the moon. I do think it's really interesting that Cancer is the only sign associated with the moon, which is followed by Leo, which is the only sign associated with the sun. And so they're right there, next to each other. One one of the things I was going to bring up too is the moon landing, right? So this idea of a moon landing, and I mean, I used to be a huge Kubrick nerd. There's like a million different things you could talk about with 2001: A Space Odyssey. I already mentioned it, right? But they were really sort of priming the pump for people to accept the moon landing, in my opinion. That's partly what the deal was. And so it's interesting that we have this narrative of going to the moon. Me personally, I don't think we can actually physically go to these places, right? And so I think sci-fi is a propaganda genre in so many different ways, unbeknownst to people who are actually creating a lot of this stuff. But it's just interesting that there is this sort of historical ascension ritual idea of stopping at the moon first, going to other places, it being the last gateway. And then also, too, you know, it relates to the idea that we have this concept that the moon is the closest thing to us of all of the sort of bodies out there, you know, in the sky, right? It's the one that you can actually see like detail with your naked eye, right? And so just the fact that that is one of the angles, going to the moon and then showing people that we landed on the moon, you know, on TV, having it be broadcast and all that kind of stuff. I think it's just like a fascinating sort of thing when you look into all of this other business. One of the other things I was going to mention too, in terms of like this ascension sort of idea, there are several like esoteric Jewish practices related to ascension ideas where you're like going to a palace, right? An etheric palace in the heavens. I think this is pretty much what's talked about when people talk about like an invisible college sort of thing. Twyman, I think, referred to it as like hyperspace, hidden hyperspace kingdoms and things like that. I think there's a lot of parallels between all of these different ideas, but there's Merkaba mysticism, which is a Jewish thing where you actually are in like a symbolic chariot, and this could just be your Merkaba, your light body, but that this chariot goes to, you know, these different places, and that there is this, again, lunar gateway that you stop at first. That's kind of like the first penetration or whatever to the other side or to other, you know, veils of existence. But again, it relates back to the chariot. So one of the things too with the chariot and the charioteer, he's enclosed. He's in a little space. He's in a little room, right? And the Hebrew letter that corresponds with that card is Chet or Cheth. And it basically means like enclosure. It means like an enclosed space, which that to me sounds very, very lunar too, with all of this vessel symbolism, you know, kind of associated with it.
Well, like Helios, Selene was said to be riding a chariot across the sky. So there's that chariot symbolism there too. And you've got Selene and Artemis being almost similar, and Apollo and Helios being similar as well. So you've got that sort of dichotomy between those two sort of carried out. Artemis has the moon symbol in her hair. Selene has the moon symbol in her hair. And so it went from sort of the Titans over to the sons and daughters of the Olympians, when it went from Selene and Helios to Apollo and Artemis.
Right. And all of the, you know, all of the planets have been kind of likened to chariots as well, right? Which I think is interesting.
From a Gnostic angle, though, you got to admit the moon is like one of the laziest archons. They just shoved all of the transformation into this one thing. Didn't really have a lot of sense to it. Didn't really have a lot of, symmetry. It's just everything that changes comes from that moon, you know?
Right. Yeah, definitely. That reminds me too, there's this idea I've read before in a couple of different of my resource books about the moon being associated again with this chalice or with this holy grail idea, and that the craters correspond with that cup, and that what symbolically this cup holds is, and you might know, I think there's stuff in the Greek mythological pantheon about this, but like a drink that gives people amnesia. And that the idea is that when you like reincarnate here, we symbolically drink from this chalice.
Cup of
once
Letha.
again, that gives us amnesia so that we don't remember past lives. Is that the thing?
Yeah, the Cup of Letha. It's drawn from the river of Letha, and you have to drink it before you get reincarnated onto the planet so that you forget.
Right, right. So I've heard people say that that's actually a lunar reference. What's going on there is it represents this last passageway before you get back, and that you don't want to remember. Actually, that the whole deal is that you don't remember potentially. I don't know, but that's awesome that you know that.
There is a.
I think that. Oh,
Sorry
sorry.
about that. Sorry, no, go ahead, TJ.
No, I was just gonna say that connects to like alcohol and then moonshine, like the word moonshine, and that where it's all about forgetting, and then with like if you want to get in like alcohol is like kind of sweeping those emotions under the rug. It's like just passes that through, not really dealing with it. So it's like the opposite side of that, and that's that trying to forget instead of dealing with it.
Spirits
call,
and
man.
Hecate,
Yeah, moonshine. Yeah.
Well, that's also really interesting, TJ, what you said, because Shiva, when Shiva is Bhairava, when he is his nighttime form, he is offered Quran, which are spirits, but they have undergone an alchemical transmutation in fire and with mantras, so sound and words, so and conscious perception of those things. So there's like a kind of alchemical transmutation, maybe you could say a ritual methodology to do that, and then he is offered the alcohol, but only after it has been ritually purified. So I think that's also really interesting. And then to what Headless said, there is a Taoist goddess called Mung Popo, who she is an old lady who has she makes soup, and she feeds the souls in the ghost roads. So this like kind of place, it's like an interstitial zone. She gives them the soup after they cross the bridge, and so they can forget and then become reincarnated. So I think that also speaks to exactly what Mario is saying as well. And it's just interesting that that's so cross-cultural.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Did you say Mon Popo?
Mung Popo. Like it's her name means like forgetting old lady.
Okay. Is it MON?
MENG.
Oh, EMNG. Okay, gotcha. Right. Kind of fits with what we were talking about etymologically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Mario, would you, so when you're talking about like how the light or the moon produces its own light, I often think how there are some really interesting gemstones associated with the moon, like pearl is one, but opal is also associated with the moon, but it's considered very unlucky, and even in Jyotish, like as a remedy, you don't do it unless your moon is very inhibited by Rahu. So that I think that's also really interesting, but opal has its own luminescence. It's just also opalescent, so it doesn't let light pass through. It kind of traps light.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. Man, that's funny. I never noticed this before. I had a client that I did a logo for, and their business was called, they're no longer around, Opal 28. And 28 is also like a lunar, number. But yeah, no, I don't have too much more to add about that with different stones. Selenite, I know, is one that's really strongly corresponded to the moon as well.
I've even said myself, I thought 28 goes with Tahuti or Toth, and people do associate him with the moon as well.
Yeah. No, exactly.
I'm going to insert a side note really quickly. It's like, so most all stable animal kingdom, animal species, everything from the honeybee to orcas, they're all matriarchal. And so that's one of the things, like with the moon, the matriarch, they consider that very stable, especially like with your marine mammals, they're all matriarchal. Not that, just wanted to insert that. If you are still adhering to the moon being feminine.
Is that why boats are always
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Nick, if you want to show maybe some of these tarot cards, you can start at slide 001. And I was telling you guys earlier before we went live. So, I have students, and I teach them the tarot and, whatever they want to learn. And I've taught a few students about the moon card, and I really kind of emphasize that this is one of the more mysterious cards, like in the deck. The moon has always been related to, mysterious things, and potentially being, malefic, in nature and things like that. Who's to say? I'm not sure, but it is kind of fascinating that these stories have kind of been around for a very, very long time, that the moon should not be trusted, or that it's artificial. It was brought here, David Icke has his like Saturn moon matrix sort of thing, right, that he put out there. So it's kind of curious that this like sort of idea continues to like evolve and still be like a thing. But it's not uncommon in the moon card to see two dogs or wolves howling at the moon. And one of the angles that I think is really fascinating with that, I picked this up from a woman, her name is Ola Wolny, and she has some really interesting things to say about Venus. And so her whole entire weave is that she thinks that a lot of symbolism that was once associated with Venus got transferred over to the moon at some point. But that the moon is some sort of construct or archon or whatever, and that moon reverence should actually be shifted back towards Venus if you want to go towards like the original sort of like essence or creation of some of these like myths and things like that. So you have to listen to her to hear her take. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting that she said is that the idea of dogs and wolves howling at the moon, it's in order to warn us against the moon. It's not in reverence, but that it's actually they're saying, hey, this thing is up there, and whatever intuitively they might pick up, they actually might be kind of trying to warn us against its power. And you could see that there's like little, they kind of look like flames, or they kind of look like little yods right underneath the moon, in between the two towers. Again, twin tower symbolism. There's always an implied middle tower, middle pillar. That is the gateway. You can even see a path leading towards, the mountains there in between these two pillars. So that is like a portal of some sort. So basically saying that the moon is some sort of gate, right, in some way, shape, or form. And then you see that lobster or crayfish, down in the water below, which is a really common animal associated with Cancer as well. So it kind of fits with that. But if you want to go maybe to the second card there, you'll see that this is like more of an older sort of take on the card. This is, like an updated version of the Marseille deck. And you see that those droplets are literally leaving Earth and going towards the moon. So again, it fits in with all these things that, we've kind of been talking about here.
So in the Greek mythology, the consort of the moon is this guy named Endymion. And Endymion means like the knowledge of the moon. So like he was the first one to map it out and understand it. And he would always be visited by the moon while he was sleeping. So there is this link between consciousness and sleep that produced 50 of the Olympian months, which would be the sons and daughters of Selene. And I think that goes back into this sort of distrust of the moon, is because it comes from a deep knowledge of what the thing is and what we're dealing with. And if you don't have that, then there's nothing to trust up there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think Lovecraft said that the greatest fear is the fear of the unknown, and so it probably plays right into that. The nighttime being, a scary place for a lot of people, and people obviously generally wanting to be indoors and things like that. And so it's associated with all things sort of mysterious, things that go bump in the night, the werewolf transformation, right? The moon is sometimes associated with different types of cryptids and things like that. So yeah, the distrust there, I can see why, it's pretty obvious. And then the feminine too. Distrust of the feminine, or of the goddess and things like that, the great mother, the dark mother, all of these different types of things are related to it. And so I can see why modern man is apprehensive or afraid to honor it or have a relationship with it or something.
I'm glad you said that, Mario, because when I started reading about the moon and how the distrust came, it was very reminiscent of me of how women have been demonized through many religions, and how distrusting and how that we are able to lie about things that men can never know about. And so the moon holds that, I think, same mystique for itself as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well put.
Yeah.
No, exactly. Makes perfect sense.
To go back to the card, here's a picture of Endymion. That's Selene up in the top corner, and what's right in front of him? It's the dog, right? And so you've almost got the tarot card right there, only without Endymion in the background. But it's like it's the knowledge of these things that sort of led him to his prominence. And eternal youth, again, back to the alchemy angle.
To go off of what Lisa just said, it's interesting because the goddess daughter, or the daughter goddess that I referenced before from China, who sits on the dark side of the moon, she is the goddess of sexual alchemy as well as spycraft and occultism. So she has this hidden, exactly like what Lisa said, that she's got this whole hidden side to her, but she's presented as a princess. So she's really not, she's like a virgin, and she's not really like a sexual consort, but there is like this element to her where she has the knowledge of these things. She has the knowledge of warcraft, but it's not just like war. It's specifically strategic and spycraft in warfare. So I think
Cerebral.
that's really interesting. Yes, cerebral, exactly.
Well, I think some mercurial figures have been associated with dog symbolism as well, which I think is kind of interesting. So it fits in line with that. And if you move on to the next card, so this would be, just go to the actually the third slide. There you go.
I could probably add something quick on the dogs.
Yeah, please.
And the moon. The sign Cancer, the two constellations and the two dog stars, Sirius A and Sirius B, are both in the sign Cancer as well. And another fun little word thing, wolves is an anagram for vowels, and wolves howl in vowels.
Ooh, cool. Yeah, I like that, man. That's awesome. Nice.
Also, Kala Bhairava, so the sort of the time king of Saturn and also the moon, his mount, his Vahana is a dog. I should have mentioned that right at the beginning.
Ooh,
but
there you go.
Yeah, he's always associated with dogs, and all the black dogs are in his retinue. So if you're trying to get on his good side, you're supposed to feed the stray dogs.
Gotcha. Right.
I'm going to insert this thing about coyotes that I just learned. That coyotes, when they howl, it's a roll call. They're basically calling to each other to see what the population looks like. In the event that there is a decrease in population, that almost simultaneously stimulates the females to go into heat so that they can increase the population. And that obviously only happens at night.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. That's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Coyotes are also associated with Saturn. It's like one of Saturn's kind of animals, and it has to do with like humility. But yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. So here, right? This is the Thoth Crowley version of the moon card, and you see that there's two Anubis figures associated with those towers, black towers, and then there's two black dogs right in front of them. And Nick, if you don't mind, just zooming into what the Anubis figures are holding in their hands, it kind of comes around full circle a little bit, if you have the ability to.
Yeah, no, my mouse is like screwed up.
So they're holding the glyphs of Mercury, right, which relates to all the things we're talking about here.
Yeah,
And
this
then,
is as much as I can go. So
if I'm not mistaken, it to me, does it look like the scepters that they're holding? Is that Thoth, or is it Set? I think it's one of those two. I bet it's Thoth. It looks like the ibis bird.
In that picture I just showed you of Endymion, he has two spears. So even in that, I think the two spears are a reference to how they did ancient astrology, because they would use them to line up with the sky and mark the progression of these different planets on the ground.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah, the pole is a helpful astronomical instrument. You can use it for a few different things. But yeah, that's perfect. So you can see here too that the moon card is associated with Pisces, and so that's the last sign, of the astrological year. and it kind of completes the end of this very watery cycle. And so, you know, you have Capricorn, which is the sea goat. It's an earth sign, but it has watery symbolism. And then you have Aquarius, which is the water bearer, but it's an air sign, but there's watery symbolism attached to it. And then you have Pisces, which actually is a water sign, and it's the two fish, right? The fishes. And so I think that's kind of interesting that it's associated with that. The watery thing definitely comes through. The end of the astrological year, some of those constellations right around that part of the ecliptic has kind of been referred to as like the oceanic sort of part of the zodiac, or the oceanic part of like the heavens, basically. And that Aquarius, the water bearer, kind of supplies water for the celestial ocean pretty much. But Pisces, you know, it's very, very, it's a mysterious sign as well. You know, it kind of, people have said that it kind of encapsulates all of the other signs, but it's very, very like murky and kind of very like etheric and spiritual, and you know, I associate it with like the depths and things like that. So I do think it's an appropriate correspondence there.
Well, it has kind of the mystery angle is in the asterism itself, where you've got one fish leading another, and sort of it's like the mystery is sort of pulling you forward, and these two different fish are bound together. Even though that would never happen in nature, somehow these two fish are bound together, and one is leading the other through these mysteries.
Yeah, and one of the ways that you can kind of interpret this binding is that it's two streams that split from one stream, right? And so it's kind of interesting too. Pisces corresponds with the feet, and so it's almost like the feet, our legs, are two streams that are connected via one stream, which would be like our actual body. So that's kind of one way of interpreting it. When you look at Pisces in the heavens, it looks like a large V, and so it almost looks like they came from the same sort of place or something along those lines. But yeah, that's an excellent point, and you could even see that too in the glyph, right? So it's like the two fish, and then they're connected through that line that binds them.
I have wondered about even the symbol of the fish, and you know, in my opinion, I do think, you know, with the tree getting into Kabbalah, and these planets would fall on there. You know, going down or going up. I mean, there's two different flows that you can do here. You know, you can go downstream or upstream. So I do think,
Totally.
like, you know, that could be possibly in there. Like, even as weird as it sounds, one of the colors for the sun is pink salmon, and that will actually go upstream. So, I mean, I don't know if it's like even to that detailed. Am I taking it too far? But it just, you know, I do think there's a possibility. That's why you have, well, one's going in one way and one's going the other way. Almost something that I'm going to get into when you're done with your stuff. I have two things I want to pull up. I will kind of even get into like as above, so below, and reflection and stuff.
Yeah, no, man, I think it's a great point. And I think maybe you see this reflected in the glyph as well, in that it kind of looks like the cross section of a torus field. And so it looks like the interior part of a torus field. I've made videos about this before, and it's like a perfect match. And so with the torus field, energy is projected, but then also received. So there's like that sacred center in the middle, the hyperbola, from which everything emanates, but then also returns to. And it kind of reminds me of what you just said there, you know, one stream leaving and then one coming back. It's almost like a white hole and a black hole or something like that too.
Well, that kind of gets in. Go ahead.
I just want to say, Nick, that actually makes a lot of sense, the pink, because the pink is this kind of incoherence. It's the synthesis in discoherence. So in and of itself, it's not the 0 point. It has both the power of creation and destruction. So it can go either way depending on its will, we'll say, or it's like how you apply where you want to go. So but pink is that color, and that really happens at the moon. Like you can go up or down right there with pink. Sorry, I just want to say that. Sorry, HG.
Thank you.
Well, I wanted to throw in the association with Christ and Dionysus when it comes to the age of Pisces, right? So you've got these fish, And Dionysus is the separated god, and before him it was Zagreus, and Zagreus was the son of Hades that was separated and then brought back together in the underworld. And then all of these symbols kind of come together in the form of Jesus Christ, where he is brought down to the underworld and then returns as the savior, which Dionysus is that savior figure, and then it all plays into that Pisces symbolism.
Yeah, excellent. No, yeah, there's being the fisher of men, right? And then nuns, noon in Hebrew means fish. And so there's a ton of Piscean Christ stuff, like through and through. I love it. Nick, if you don't mind going to the last card there, it's just the Chariot card from the Rider-Waite deck. It's nothing too crazy. I'm sure you guys have seen it. I can't remember if we've even touched upon it or looked at it just yet, but one of the things I just want to mention is so corresponds with Cancer. Most of Cancer takes place during the 7th month of the year, so this would be July. This is the 7th card of the Major Arcana. It's often said, I did a whole entire presentation when I was really into it. I called it 7 Gates to the Great Beyond. This idea that there's 7 main veils or realms or steps or transitions or whatever you want to say, corresponding with the 7 traditional planets, corresponding with the 7 signs of Ursa Major, in my estimation. So the number 7 has this transformative quality to it. There are certain types of alchemy that really make use of the number 7. And then, of course, 7 has so many different things going on here in this realm, right? 7 colors of the rainbow, 7 days of the week, like et cetera, et cetera. But one of the things I wanted to mention is that one of sort of the things with this card is that a lot of classic Chariot cards, they actually do not show the charioteer or the chariot in motion. In fact, oftentimes, they're kind of alluding to the fact that it cannot move. And so here you look at this chariot, and it looks like a cubic stone, right? Also notice that the sphinxes in front, they're not even tethered to the chariot at all, right? And so there's no wind, that's blowing in his hair. He's not even on a road or anything like that. And so that is one of the sort of the hidden dynamics with this card. I believe, kind of my understanding of things, is that it's kind of like that top that you see on that crescent or that crest there on the front of the chariot. It's internal movement, right? It's an internal sort of dynamic. It's like a spinning wheel, or it's like a whirlpool or something along these lines. And so that's kind of how I perceive it. This is kind of how our emotions work as well. And so water being related to the emotions in tarot, literally emotion has motion right there. I've said this before, but it's really interesting that emotion and motion are related. You just have to remove the E, and then you remove the M of motion, and then phonetically you have ocean. All of these things are related. Ocean, motion, emotion, and this is internal movement, right? That's how I tend to kind of perceive things. But that's one of the dynamics that I just wanted to point out there, is that the chariot itself, it's like an immobile vehicle. It's a vehicle that's actually not moving. And you'll see a lot of paradoxes in the tarot like that, where you start looking at it and you're like, why is it showing it not moving? You would think that the chariot should be moving. And in modern decks, it is in a lot of, in a lot of decks, but older decks, more often than not, they're deliberately showing it not moving. It's completely stationary.
Right. Well, in ancient architecture, they would always try to make the king of the unmoving hub of the world. So that would go back to that polar symbolism as well. Like they want him in the middle of everything, not moving, being stable, and then everybody can look to him as being that center hub. And that chariot idea of not moving while also being the vehicle for this, source of power kind of has that implication there.
That's it, dude. You totally got it, man. Yeah, the unmoved mover being at the invariable middle. Yep, that's it.
That even fits with the sign Cancer too, because it's the crab. The crab does not move forward. The crab walks sideways. So as far as like motion, it's not. It's it's not moving forward.
That's interesting. I like that.
But Nick, feel free and share whatever you have queued up.
Okay, sure. another thing, even when it comes to, I was going to get into the Kabbalah a little bit, but like you're even saying something now. Even idleness is considered the vice for Yesod, which is where the moon would fall on the tree of life. So you guys are talking about motion and stuff. The vice would be doing nothing, I guess.
Mm.
You should be moving, maybe. Yeah, I wanted to show. Lisa, did you have something you wanted to show too?
Yeah, the card, the second to the last card that Mario was talking about. If you pull up the second to the last card that Mario was talking about, just real quick. Yeah, is that too much? Well,
no,
basically, it. When I was looking at the card that he pulled up, it reminded me of this, and this is the actual hormonal profile of an ovulating fertile female.
Mm.
And so you see progesterone, estrogen, LH, FSH, all that other stuff. But if you look at that second card, it has 2 pillars, and then it has kind of the up and down type arcing and what have you. That's what it looked like to me.
Yeah.
Yep, right there at the bottom.
Yeah.
Hold on.
So anyway, that's what I just wanted to kind of point that out, because that's what popped out at me. May not be related, but
No, I think it is, Lisa. I think I even see a fish in the slide that you showed. I think that fish is so important. I was trying to figure out like the estrus, a cycle of a regular fish, but they're so varied. But fish is actually one of the transgressive meats. Sorry, I was looking for the word. Transgressive meats in Tantra. There are 5 transgressive meats. It's interesting also that number 5, because of what you said about how they're the 2 phases, the follicular and the luteal phase, they're divided into 14 days. Well, that's 4 plus 1, right? And then 28. So you have 2 8s. So 8 plus 8 is 16. That's a 7. So that relates to what Mario was also saying. And then you have this like idea that the Yesod or number 9 contains time. So 7 is like a full cycle in Kabbalah. It's like it's 1 up, 1 down, and then you sort of like come back around, just like 8, just like a figure 8 is like an infinite. You're sort of like back in the cycle again.
Right.
Does anybody want to guess what number the Orphic hymn to Selene is?
Number 9.
There you go. It's number 9.
Number 9.
Number 9.
Yeah, nice.
That was it.
All right, awesome. Thank you.
And then
That's really bugged out, actually.
Feminine energy, it's the feminine energy.
Ah.
Right?
And it takes 9 months to birth.
Yeah.
9 months, yeah.
There's even there's some tarot decks where the moon card, I'm thinking of a deck by this woman named Barbara Walker. She's a pretty amazing symbologist. She wrote a few really awesome symbolism books, and then she created her own deck. And she has 9 droplets of blood going to the moon, deliberately so. And she says that it's the 9 missing menstrual cycles when you're having a child. So I thought that's pretty interesting. And then something you said about the number 5 too, 5 days of bleeding, right? Isn't that the average?
Yeah, it's between 2 and 7, but the average is 5. Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah,
that's even interesting because you know how much I've said that I think Gabora, because it's a red sphere, a lot of the stuff on there associated with blood. Well, the number for that would be 5. I even see that as possibly going along with that.
Sure,
that's interesting.
And in gematria,
sorry about that, TJ.
Sorry, just a quick one. In gematria, the word 5 and the word 9 both equal the same value.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, look at this guy. Thank you. That's pretty bugged out. All right, go ahead before I go.
Yeah. Sorry about that, Nick.
No.
When you were saying that about Gavura and then having the relationship, just remember that for when my slide comes up, and then bring that up again.
All right, I definitely will. One of the things I wanted to get into, and I'll read a little bit, I guess, kind of out of a book that I have, and it's Kabbalah. And this is where the moon is associated with. So I'm kind of going more with like Kabbalistic ideas with it as well. The ninth path is called the pure intelligence because it purifies the emanations. It proves and corrects the designing of their representations and disposes the unity with which they are designed without diminution, I don't know how to say that, or division. One of the moon is associated with it. The virtue is independence. One of the titles of it is the treasure house of images. The spiritual experience will be the vision of the machinery of the universe. And the vice is idleness, like I had said before. My opinion, it's probably gonna sound out there, but I am gonna, actually attach eyeball symbolism to this. The machinery of the universe, I do actually start to question and here, like on this thing right here, that's thing with all the circular things almost looks like a record. Actually, almost looks like you're kind of putting the needle on the record right there. That's the lens. And then you have the zonules of Zin right here that almost looks like spider webs or like, all sorts of weird stuff going up in here. That is what makes the lens move. And then once the lens starts moving, it depends on which way the light is going. Either it's going one way or it's going the other way. So we'll start to even reflect images. And all this stuff is what's the machine, in my opinion, all the moving parts that actually makes this thing move. So I'm going to show another thing. I got one more picture I think I show. It's a little bit different. Here's the lens. Here's the zonules of Zen. All this stuff starts moving. And it goes as above, so below. Yeah, it's just, to me, I do question sometimes, and I've even said it in the Eyeball series. I did question if the moon, in a sense, or your soul at least, what is associated with the moon, could actually be talking about your eyeball lens. Not to get into it too deep, but I don't know if at least if there's anything you want to add to that, maybe to.
No, you said it pretty great.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, but yeah, that's the simple way to try to break it down, and whatever. All right, Jen. So you can go if you like.
Well, that's a perfect illustration of a illusion, right? This is what is adjusting our eyes to the illusion that we're being shown, and that's the moon right there,
Yeah, and then like even with the fish, how I said either direction. I mean, again, that goes back, I think, to your lens, deciding which way the shit's reflecting off of there. So I don't know. Kind of like the stream of light, flow of light, maybe. Jin, did you have besides that picture that you sent?
I did. I put two, if that's okay.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I just want to make sure that there's another one because I was going to pull that one up.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
No, the last one. There we go. Awesome. Yes, I will pull that up right now. Stop screen. Present. Here we go.
Okay, awesome. Well, exactly. I mean, Nick, you kind of stole it a little bit because you explained it, even though you used Hebrew Kabbalah. It's really interesting. So this is Chanda by Rava. So he is one of the 8 time kings, although there are 9 time kings in total. He is one of the 8 manifestations. And this is his consort named Komari. This is really interesting because Komari is actually associated with Mars and with war. And he is associated, obviously, with the moon. And that's even his name is Chanda by Rava, which means like a crescent, the crescent king or crescent ferocious king. So his sin is also idleness or tamas. But it can also mean other kinds of transgressive sins. But usually tamas means like this no movement. So it's like a production of nothingness or smoke. And it's a delusory smoke. So I think it's really interesting. And then how they're in sort of like they're together, right? Like they're a couple. So it's like it's the idea of Mars that you brought up, the 5. That it's interesting because in some of the Lurianic texts, Dath can also be assigned 5. If you add one more, it's like a secret 5 because 5 plus 5 is 10, and then you got Kether. But I think that's really interesting that it's like Gavura, but she's at Yesod, and it's really her sphere. It's really like her world. But when he is the primary deity, she calms. She's like the complement to his cool and sort of anger. So she, even though she's hot and warming, she kind of, it brings it into synthesis. It brings it into equilibrium. So I think that's really interesting about that one. And he has like obviously an innate relationship to Saturn, because that is really where the Time King emanates from, is Saturn. And to go to what TJ had said about Coyote, I think the jackals. So Kali is his wife sometimes, but when Kali is deeply associated with Saturn, so she also is surrounded by jackals in the same way that he is surrounded by black dogs. She's surrounded by jackals. So when you see him with Kali, not with Komari, but they have that kind of interrelationship where they switch the vahanas or the vehicles. Okay, sorry guys, I didn't mean to go on that long. And Nick, if you want to do the last one, I'll just do it really quick. Or
the other one?
Yes,
yeah,
thank
I
you.
got you.
Yeah, no, that was awesome and helpful, man.
Okay.
I think the male aspects of the moon have really been deeply occulted.
Oh, for sure. All right, this guy.
I think it goes with like the yin yang more though, where it the flow and the balance of the two. And you even brought up earlier about the pink, but then why do they call it a blue moon? Right? Because then there's that rebalance of it. And then if you really want to get into like color theory and then inverted reality and all this, also like when you have a newborn, is it going to wear pink or is it going to wear blue? But when you really look at it, pink is just red with white. Red is masculine and blue is feminine. So there's an inversion there right from birth to keep us even more confused.
That's even another thing that I think is weird about the moon, is like the fact that if the color is changing, that means whatever's reflecting off of it's not the same anymore either. You know what I'm saying? Like that frequency has changed for the color to change. Like nobody ever thinks. I mean, to me, I find that a little interesting, weird, really.
And to go with what TJ just said, like turquoise is also a color that appears with pink at the moon. Like that can also be a color of Yesod, like very neon, sort of like neon purple, neon pink, and neon blue. So that's really interesting. So this is the mother goddess. So what we saw in the last picture was the daughter goddess. I guess I should have probably explained that. But this is the mother goddess who sits at the moon. And when she sits there, she is so you see in the lower portion of the image there's a black snake. So that could be, it's not the only way to describe the image, but it can be understood as the kundalini rising. So I know that a lot of people like on that, we don't really call it those things in tantra, like that's more of me borrowing popular culture terminology, but it people understand what that means, so that is kind of a good explanation. But so she can ride a black snake or a white snake, and but it's inside of her. Like, I mean, it's her energetic sort of body, and it's moving up her spine for the first time. So it's like the first experience of the energy moving upwards. So, and it also relates to what Nick said about like Yesod having like that quality of idleness as it's negative. Well, not negative, but it's sort of inverse, or it's sin. So she's sitting there using the energy, so she's like very hot and she's sweating. That's how it's conceived of. But she's not actually like, she's not because it makes you feel amorous, it makes you feel angry, like all the channels are being unblocked. But instead of like acting on it, because she's red, right, that's the color of rajas or impulse, she actually sits there and she transmutes it. To go back to the very beginning about what Mario was talking about, how it's like a transmutational zone. So that is her sort of power, is she has this like electricity that happens at that area, and it sounds very much like how it's described is obviously like howling. So and I know Nick has played the sounds of the moon on the show before, and it's so there's a very deep, like, how would they know this in 1300? Like, that's very interesting, right? So I think that is like also like another aspect of the moon, and then you can see she has a sort of a green gold halo, and green is also a color that happens in synthesis between red and blue. It is the 0 point. So pink and green, those are the two primary kinds of colors, plus turquoise, but it's only a flash of turquoise, right? It's not like you're not seeing it like in totality, but what you're really seeing is pink and green. So I think, yeah, even to go back what Nick was saying, like that salmon pink, that is the uprising power. So you can choose to go up towards what we could say is Tipperith or maybe Dath, or you could go down into maybe the Undertree.
Right. Wow, man, that was great, dude. There's so much to riff off of with what you just mentioned. The first thing I thought of was the Black Madonna, and so the Virgin Mary, right? Another expression, and the Virgin Mary oftentimes is standing on a crescent moon, and it's not uncommon for there to be a serpent down below as well, which just parallels exactly what you're mentioning there. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And then here, Day Moon, what about the triple goddess? Yeah, I have that in my notes here, the triple moon goddess sort of thing. And I think I don't know how literal this is. Maybe someone can fill in the gaps here, but the way I've always kind of remembered it is Hecate being like the triple moon goddess, kind of like goddess of the crossroads. But then I think like the consort would be like a mercurial figure. It would be like Lord of the Crossroads sort of thing, and then kind of tying in again this mercurial lunar sort of aspect here.
Well, with Hecate, which would be this triple moon goddess, right? You've got these three phases of life. You've got the threefold meeting of the paths or the trails, and also you've got the dogs again. Dogs pop right up there with Hecate.
Right.
And the keys, also the keys of the Vatican, are very Hecate related. So these things, the underworld, the keys to the underworld, and then the keys to the Vatican are the exact same symbols. So it's also magic, witchcraft, the moon, graves, ghosts. And so, she is associated with the sky, the earth, and the sea. So all of these triple aspects are found in that goddess. It's like all of these lines converging right there. So it's not just the moon. It's just so much more when it comes to that. And very closely associated with Asia Minor in Turkey, right? So that's where her central cult was in Turkey. And so also that's where the moon god, Men, that's where we get the term men from. That was also in Turkey as well. So it's very, very interesting, very mysterious when it comes to these sort of things. But I think, if any of the goddesses survived, it would be Hecate. She's always the survivor. She was one of the Titans that Zeus especially honored. So even after Zeus took over after the Titans, he's like, no, I'm taking my cousin Hecate with us. Let's go. So it was an interesting, very, very primordial and very, very constant throughout all of history is this Hecate symbolism.
Well, I'll just add in really quick since we're talking about the triple goddess. So this goddess on screen is called Tripura Sundari, meaning the ferocious queen of the three worlds. So it's not necessarily earth, sky, and heaven or hell or whatever tripartite sort of cosmology you're using. It's really the levels of consciousness. So it has, just like with Yesod, it's like people say, oh, the vibe is wrong in this room. That always reminds me very Yesod. Like I feel like that's what they're talking about. They're talking about like the vibration, the feeling, just like the first time that they're feeling the energetic sort of I guess, cosmology in a room. That seems to me like what they're talking about, and what also Headless is saying with this primordial energy, like this sort of primordial Eve energy, that she's not in her fullness, but she can get there. So there's something that has potential, like pregnancy in Tantra is often associated with potential, even though I said she's not pregnant, which is true, but she's not pregnant, but she does have that potential. And I think that ties in with what Lisa was saying with the biological layer. It's like it's all there. It's just maybe she doesn't know it yet.
You know, it's really weird. I was actually going to bring that up with the triple goddess. I was actually going to go back to the thing. For some reason, that popped up in my head when she was talking about the first part of the 13 days, then you're bleeding or whatever, and then the other days. I just found that weird. Like that's like kind of 3 stages in itself, if you think about it.
Well, in Rome, Hecate was called trivia. So it brings on a whole new meaning to trivia night.
Yeah. What was it, Lisa, that you were saying before? You have 13 days, and then what?
You have ovulation, the
Yeah, okay,
potential
that
for
was what
pregnancy,
and
and then
then
you followed by 13 days of waiting, quiescence, or waiting, not quiescence, waiting for implantation or whatever. Or if it did get fertilized, then waiting for it to implant. And then once it never sends a signal back to the ovary that there was no implantation or no fertilization, then it just basically resets everything, and then you bleed, and then wash the uterus, the lining of the uterus that built up during the follicular phase to ready itself for implantation will then be sloughed off, and that is what is menses.
Yeah, the number 13 being a lunar number, 13 lunar months, right? And it's the card associated with death. So the major arcana, the 13th card, is the death card. And it really is a cycle breaker, like through and through, the number 13. It's very feminine. That's why I think a lot of cultures have a disdain for the number 13, and they fear it, kind of like what we were talking about earlier. And I think that's even kind of by extension, I think partly the reason why there's a lot of people who absolutely vehemently hate talking about Ophiuchus, the 13th sign, the potential 13th sign, because it breaks the harmony of the 12, which is very solar. And we're talking about lunar symbolism here, right? So very, very feminine. So even death kind of breaking the cycle and starting this new cycle, So just wanted to throw that out there.
And that's funny you say that, because if you think about Mary Magdalene as being a disciple, pretend, she was the 13th disciple, and she was what broke the 12, right? I mean, if you leave Judas out, right? But there is that. And then in addition to, if you remember what the hormone profile looks for a woman between ovulations, that is about 4 or 5 major hormones in your body. For men, imagine testosterone just crashing and not coming back for 13 days, and then just soaring up out of nowhere within 24 hours. And then you're peaked, and then all of a sudden crashing for the next 13 days. I think you would go mad. And I think that is basically when females undergo that crash and peaking with their hormones. They go through that, PMS or moodiness or what have you, and you end up like almost like a lunacy type characteristics.
Yeah, exactly. Great stuff. Right on. Well, unfortunately, I have to get going, but you guys enjoy the rest of the stream, and I did learn a lot. I really love talking to you guys. I think this is a really solid, exceptional crew. So all of the insights are, very much appreciated. But yeah, I'll check you guys next time, okay?
All right. Thank you very much, buddy.
See you guys.
Later.
Bye.
See you.
And here we got TJ. If you want, now you could take over with your slides.
Yeah. So the number most associated with the moon in numerology is the number 2. And what do you understand about the moon? You can understand about the number 2, which would also be that yin yang, the 2 sides to everything. But it is more so the number 2 itself is a more feminine energy. And it's even and then in astrology, the second house in astrology, the moon is exalted in the second house, and the second house rules money and finances. So you got that moony moon kind of connection there as well. And then like the chakras I kind of connected to would be the root chakra, and that's why I wrote lizard brain, but I forget what the name of the lizard brain is. But with that too, it's like the theory is like, oh, the lizard people are on the moon or like that kind of thing. But in my psychedelic experiences, it's like the lizard people come out on the new moon and the werewolves come out on the full moon. And then with it being creation, it's connected to the sacral chakra, and then it's also connected to the third eye as well, the higher mind. So alchemizing in the moon, you can alchemize through those chakras. Yeah,
I actually think, in my opinion, yeah, I'll go to the next one.
Yeah,
It just probably is like not really probably a popular opinion, but I do think if you're going up the tree, as soon as you hit your soda, I think you're already like you're kind of like fucking with magic at that point already. I know it's not like all the way up across the abyss, but like I think once you come off of Malkuth, you're already like you're on your way there.
I agree with that, Nick. I think that makes a lot of sense for especially for tantric Buddhism. Like your first practice is envisioning the deity at the moon disk, so he's sitting on the moon and he's surrounded by the 4 pillars of rectification is what we call it, and the pillars spin, but he stays in the center, so he's like the secret fifth. So I think that's really interesting and goes a lot because that's your preliminary practice, so that you are doing magic, you're doing transmutation, but it's just maybe your awareness isn't there yet, your perception isn't there yet.
Well, you could also say that the 5 breaks the 4 and the 13 breaks the 12.
Well, that's interesting also about 13, because 13 can also refer to the 13, like Chesed has that innate 13 layers where it's called like the 13 doors of mercy. So God is more complete in that sphere, or he can be more expressed in Chesed through those 13 doors. So while other cultures may look at it unlucky, Hebrew Kabbalah looks at 13 very lucky, because obviously it's a 4, which is Chesed. And then to go with what TJ was saying, the 2 is the lowest prime number. Everybody thinks it's 1, but 1's not really a prime number. 2 is the prime number. So it has that sort of male and female alchemical balance. Even though it might be weighted feminine, there is a implied synthesis there.
Mene and men.
Nice. So moon matches with magician in gematria. So like there we have it. And that really, like, that one really stuck out. Mary, like feminine energy, birth, sleep, vibes, roll tide. But then also the feminine, like in fighting too, your masculine is your sword, your feminine is your shield. So shield matches with the moon.
Yo, that's really
oceans. And then
I gotta show this. I totally forgot to show this. Please forgive me. I'm just gonna take this down because you just said shield too, and I think this is really funny. Here, let me just stop the screen. I'm gonna present this real quick. This was something else that I had before that made me think about the moon. I have also thought about shields before, to be totally honest with you. So now, since he said that, I gotta show it. But to me, I've even thought like possibly, it's gonna sound crazy, maybe even the clock with all the ticks going around it, because like the moon is even associated with time, lunatic. I want to show this other picture of going back to the part of the eye, just a different way of looking at it, and I think it's freaking weird. That's the Zaniel's Zin and your lens. And those things attaching to it is what moves it and makes it go up and down. To me, it looks like a shield. You almost can start saying it starts to look like a planet almost, something.
I'm getting big Medusa vibes. Do you see the Medusa vibes there? Because Medusa is on the shield, Aegis.
Yo, if I might be able to zoom in on this really good. This isn't the best picture, but even these things, if I was to get a close-up look on these things, it looks just like the fucking Hermit Tarot card, dude. It's like a hooded dude holding a staff. It looks fucking insane.
Yeah,
they
very
look like
ghost,
little people.
Yeah. This is what I was saying when we covered the Olympics, when those people were on those sticks swinging in the streets. These are the people that that was what this is right here.
Wow.
And that's exactly how they move too. the way those people were like kind of bending in the streets.
And you know, Medusa, she's known for her eyes that petrify.
Yeah. I mean, I know this is out there, but it was something that I wanted to show. I even, it looks like a fucking sandworm.
Yeah, it does.
And those motherfuckers don't sit still, according not in Beetlejuice, you know. So they obviously don't have idleness.
Well, that's actually interesting about the sandworm because they vibrate under the earth, right? Like if you watch Tremors or you watch like
Yes.
Beetlejuice or Dune, and that is like Yesod, and it also is how you could say like the sound travels up from hell, if you want to use that cosmology, and it vibrates the moon. But then there's also this upward, maybe celestial force that also vibrates at the moon. So you have to kind of discern. It's like you have to discern which sound you're listening to. I don't know. I thought that.
I could see that too. I mean, that's kind of like what they say, that the moon can drive you crazy, right? Yeah, I like that. All right, TJ, here we go. Sorry, I pulled you off your path there, but I had to get that out.
No, it's all good. Yeah, the moon on the left, those matches are very interesting. And then again, anything with the and moon, and if you had the, so magician is going to match, the magician is going to match with the moon. But we have extreme, like, you know, it can drive you to your extremes. We have like look up, we have reality, like hidden codes. There was so many words in like pop culture and stuff that I excluded that were like, it was just holy crap. All these things are using the moon. That's so I put Netflix there as an example.
It's interesting.
Like,
You have
I don't know, all those words kind of just fit with them.
Talked about moonshine
Alchemist?
before. Alcohol for lunar.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Isn't an alchemist? I mean, that's kind of like, isn't that what distilling is?
Right. You're condensing these fluids as you're heating them up.
Yeah,
And that's exactly what the moon does.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And then wheat matches with moon. So like it's your grains, your sugar, your grains and your sugar and your yeast that make the alcohol as well. And then shoes connected to the feet, connected to the spirit, connected to Pisces.
Connected to the soul.
Yeah, the abyss. Yeah. Yeah,
the grain is really interesting, DJ. Sorry.
What are we saying, Jen?
No, go ahead.
Just saying, grain idea is really interesting because if you look at the alchemical symbol for Ceres, like the moon, it is a hand sickle, like a peasant farmer sickle, just like a crescent moon almost, like how it usually gets associated with Saturn and the scythe, but really it's really associated with Ceres. So I think that's a dead on. Like there is like a threshing sort of like a alchemical process of the transmutation of alcohol spirits that totally makes sense, especially for Yesod too and the moon.
All right, here we go, TJ.
So we have Moon Day and Mooney, or Monday and Money, both match in Gematria. And then they match with Bitcoin, Dogecoin, River. Rockets go to the moon, right? Ladybugs, it's ladybug season, so they're representing abundance. The monarch has to do the queen. You know, it's the feminine energy is the magnetism. Liquid, we're talking like the moon is like the fastest, the most like changing the most signs. The most are going through that. So that's what the wheels and the samsara and like figuring out how to master that moon can benefit you like monetarily if you can tap into that and that's your thing. And then those all equal in Sumerian the 432, and 432 is a crazy number where if you take the pyramids, you can do the math of the pyramids in foot, cubic, and meters, and there's all this math you can do that all adds up. I don't have the math here. I'm not a genius, but a lot of that math adds up to 432 in the three different measurements, which is actually insane that that's even possible. And then I just have the Wall Street Bull there too, because it's like the moon in the second house, and then the Taurus connecting to that. And then, the crescent horns, that's a very good one. And then at the start of the show, Headless Giant said he didn't want to have any poop jokes, but we're talking about
jokes,
how
full
it's
moon.
number 2.
Oh, but
Full moon as well, but moons symbolically are used on outhouses. It will have a moon on it. And I
Right.
think that has to do with, like, from like a spiritual perspective, it's like being able to release your emotions, being able to, like, if you don't, like, spiritual advice would be like, if you don't know how to like face these emotions and feel them, then they're just going to fester there and you're not moving your emotions. And that's when you might bottle up and explode on say like a full moon or whatever. So if you're not willing to process that, then that you're just going to bottle up those emotions. And then like if there was a his and hers, it would have a moon for the female and a sun for the male. But if there's just one, it'll just be on that. Very interesting.
TJ, I gotta pull up this picture again, and I gotta show like one of the things on it. This is hilarious. Wow. Sorry, I was laughing. I was just like, you're talking about like pooping and stuff, and then it just made me think about something that is associated with this animals. And this, I think, even has it on here. Yeah. Hold on. Let me pull this up. I'm sorry. Bear with me, people. Present. I have to stop the screen. My bad. Screen. Now you're talking about like, the outhouse and stuff. And what happened? No, we lost him. He'll be back. Talking about the outhouses and doing the number 2. Well, the part over here that I said looks like kind of like the needle on the record. That is inside your eye when your pupil changes, when it gets smaller. That is your sphincter muscle that does that. So the same thing that you're using to do a number 2 with is actually going to make your pupil get smaller as well.
And it's the 2 areas that have the least amount of blood supply.
Yep. The same muscle that's in your ass is in your eye.
Well, there's actually something really interesting, Nick. In Culpepper's medicine, the medicine of the eye is often associated with the moon. So eyebright would be a perfect herb to describe that. But then there's also the mucilaginous herbs like cannabis, not the psychogenic part, but the seeds, like cannabis seeds. Those are lunar, and because they make you go to the bathroom. So I think that there's something really interesting there.
Yeah, I just found that funny.
Is
I
very
kind of
interesting.
laughed. I was like, does share the sphincter muscle. Oh, nice. Where'd you get this from?
I realized you sent that to me, but
Yeah,
I realized that I'm missing. There's a slide that's supposed to go with it that I don't have, so I don't have like the gematria matches for Yasad. But nonetheless, like it's numbers 9, Feminine, and those showing up a bunch. The number 13 being like the 13 connected to the moon cycle is very interesting. When I teach people about the number 13 from a spiritual perspective, I teach it as, say, like on your keyboard, you have your 7 white keys and your 5 black keys, and that adds up to 12. And those are your 12 musical keys. Pick whatever note you start on. The next 12 keys are going to follow that. So say if you're starting on a C, you go up 13 notes past that, you're now the same note on a new frequency, on a higher frequency, on a higher octave, on a higher, like, so the 13th to me represents going to a higher numerical octave. But again, it's death and birth are 2 of the same, so you can't get to the one without the other.
I like that a lot.
Oh boy. Moon map. Jeez.
The moon map, it would take way too long to try and decode absolutely every single name of every crater on the moon. But nonetheless, what I found looking at them, a lot of them are called mare, and horses were brought up a lot tonight. So mare connecting like with a female horse, very interesting. And then I was thinking about that, and like Sagittarius being connected to the horse, but then the moon connected to the pineal gland, because what surrounds the pineal gland is the hippocampus, which we then have hippo, and hippo also connects to Sagittarius in the hips as well. So I just found that very interesting that that's all connected, and that the moon, like half these craters have the word mare in it.
Sagittarius also connects to 13.
And then on the left are just like the no. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
I don't know if I said it in the episode. Maybe I said it on Billy Ray's. I don't know if I said it on. I might have said it on ours when we covered the Olympics. If I didn't, the part in the Olympics when they showed that horse in the water, that silver horse and the guy on it, I did actually think that was like all like lunar symbolism actually. So I find that interesting because like mare and the guy was on a horse going through water for a long time.
100%. No, you definitely did mention it, and we discussed it at least for 5 or 10 minutes. And yeah, it's really interesting because a lot of the solar deities are associated like with men and horses, and then you also have that sort of dragon horse conflation at Mercury. And then you could exactly like TJ saying, like you have a feminine horse that is at the moon. And then I don't know if you heard me, I said 13. 13 is also associated with Sagittarius because Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, so Jupiter's the 4, right? So I think TJ, you're really onto something. There's a thread that's connecting all of this.
Sorry, just really quickly. There's
Ophiuchus. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Just really quickly, there is like some sort of myth that goes along with females and horses. And I believe it's something that when a young female, like if she's 12, 13 years old, that she will bond with a horse, but I guess not better, but well prior to having her period. And there's this like unbreakable bond between the horse, between a horse and a young recently menstruating female, and the bond is like crazy. So just FYI, there is that lore.
Huh.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just gonna add that to Sagittarius, like Ophiuchus would be in between Scorpio and Sagittarius as well. Scorpio being the mystery and the mystique, and its original ruler was Mars. Never mind, I was going to say the moon, but the moon still kind of connects with all the water signs.
You want me to go on to the next one?
Yeah, I don't think there's too much more. There might only be one more.
Yeah, there we go.
So, and two other numbers kind of associated with the moon in numerology is the number 4 and the number 7, because those oftentimes will connect to Rahu and Ketu, which are the north node and south node. And then with like what was brought up with the wolves being howling, I then looked at the code 247, which is like 24/7, but we have emergency broadcast system. Let's get ready to rumble. Realize. And the never-ending story. And then the last one I added, the 13th of November. That's about when Ophiuchus would be, but that's also Taylor Swift's birthday, and she's really getting used as symbolically as this feminine energy and feminine power. And she's often portrayed as kind of this like Artemis warrior kind of person, like a little bit fiery. I see a lot of Artemis symbolism in hers, and Artemis has to do with the story of Ophiuchus as well. It's Artemis that sent a scorpion to go attack Orion, and then Ophiuchus intervened the fight, or Ophiuchus came after with the cure.
Well, Rahu is always associated with scorpions, and particularly when he's used in magic. His symbol is always a scorpion. We call them sky iron scorpions. So they're kind of blue, dark blue in color, and they descend like a fireball. I know it sounds crazy. It descends like a fireball. That's how you're supposed to visualize it. And then it goes off to do its thing. But it's interesting, too, about the wolves, because Ketu he doesn't have a head. Like, yeah, the image that you're showing, he has a head, but really he doesn't have a head. He's just the tail of the dragon. So he can have different animal heads. Like usually it's a tiger, but sometimes it's a serpent. Sometimes it's I've seen it as a dog. It's not very common, but it depends. But yeah, there's something really interesting, TJ, with that as well.
And then 47, when you put those together, that's the degrees of the compass. The compass with the G on it.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
47 as well.
All right. Is there anything anybody else got?
I'll just mention that Ketu's a planetary square number is 11. So if you make like a planetary square for Ketu, it in traditional Vedic way, or not Vedic, Jyotish way, yeah, it's 11. So I think that's really interesting as well, to go with the 4 and the 7.
Okay. I think so. Since TJ's done, I think we'll wrap it up here.
No, there's the one last thing that I could have brought up during the show was with the sign Cancer. In the summer, in the Western, when it's the summer, that's when the sun's at the highest point. So that's why it's ruled by the moon, because that's when the moon has its most power, because the sun isn't influencing as much energy because it's further away. And then with that, like the moon card and all that is like when you show that, when that shows up in a tarot reading, it usually has to do with are you getting your own power back? Do you need to get your own power back, or is someone stealing your own power? So it has a lot to do with this like power within yourself and yeah, the alchemizing of your own waters and everything, right?
It's interesting.
Which I will say that when the sun is the highest in July, that is the maximum that you can receive from the sun in terms of vitamin D. This is where you're loading all of your vitamin D to go into winter.
And that'll help prime your pineal gland too, right?
Yes. Yes.
Interesting. Huh. Even with like I mean, I guess, it's kind of it's where it is anyway, the lens. It is kind of in the middle of like both extremes of the eyeball. You know what I'm saying? Like from one end to the next. Yeah. I don't know. All right. Yeah, I guess we'll wrap it up here then. We've got nothing else.
One quick thing. Sorry, Nick.
Go ahead.
The first pentacle of the moon in the Greater Keys is actually the pentacle that opens all doors. So, and if you look at it, it actually has like that kind of Rahu Ketu inverse U symbolism right on the pentacle. So that I think that's actually really interesting. I just thought of that. I'm sorry.
That's great.
That's interesting. That's kind of like it's a little bit like kind of like that thing we were looking at prior to the show. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody have anything else? All right. Okay, so now I can wrap it up.
I think we've covered a lot.
Yeah, no, yeah. We went almost 2 hours. We lost Headless. Headless said he lost connection. So go check out his stuff. His links will be in the bottom. I think they're probably in there already. If not, I'll edit. Lisa, you want to plug yourself one more time?
So Lisa on Twitter and the occultresearchinstitute.org, and a lot of contributors have contributed a lot of great work to that site. Please give it a view, a read when you can.
Thank you very much. And yes, Contemporary Problems and TJ is on there, and Jin the Ninja is on there. So go check that stuff out. TJ, let everybody know where they can find you again.
Contemporaryproblems.com, and then wherever you consume your media, just search Contemporary Problems and you'll find me.
Awesome. Thank you very much, as usual, for coming on and doing your thing. Hopefully being able to move forward and do, the rest of the planets as well. And, it'll be the same crew if we keep moving forward. And Jin the Ninja, let everybody know where they can find you.
Okay, so Threshold Saints, Apple and Spotify. Michael Hoffman, if you're interested in Twilight language, and I bring in a lot of Tantra and a lot of Kabbalah because it's such an important concept in both of those things. So thank you guys so much, Nick, Lisa, TJ, Headless, obviously. And I really appreciate it. I've been loving this lunar solar series, and if we do planets, I'd love to be a part of it. Thank you.
Yeah. I think that would be pretty fun. I think it would get really interesting, to tell you the truth. All right, yeah. Thank you, everybody in the chat. There was a bunch of people in here. There was a lot going on. That's why I go live. I'm telling you the truth. I wasn't even going to go live at all this week, and I was like, you know what? I'll do it tonight. I got a good crew on, so yeah. And I knew I probably wouldn't really be able to do much next week either. So, thank you all for coming on. That's why I do it. I had a lot of good stuff in there, stuff that I threw up on the screen. If you're catching the replay, I highly suggest to check out the chat. That is why I go live as well, because there's always good stuff in there. That is the end of another Occult Rejects. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.